Hello everyone. We are going to talk about JSON. Uh, JSON, short for JavaScript Object Notation, is a format for sharing data. As its name suggests, JSON is derived from the JavaScript programming language, but is available for use by many languages like Python, Ruby, PHP, and Java. JSON is usually pronounced like the name Jason. Um, JSON uses the .json extension when it stands alone, when it's defined in another file format as in HTML. It can appear inside of codes as a JSON string, or it can be an object assigned to a variable. This format is easy to transmit between web server and, of course, the client or browser. Uh, Also, a very readable and lightweight, JSON offers a good alternative to XML and requires much less formatting. This informational guide will get you up to speed with the data you can use in JSON files and the general structure and syntax of this format. Uh, let's talk about syntax and structure. Uh, this is a very short and simple example. Uh, A JSON object is a key value data format that is typically rendered in curly braces. When you are working with JSON, you'll likely see JSON objects in a .json file, but they can also exist as a JSON object or string within the context of a program. A JSON object looks something like this. A picture here. I uploaded here, and although this is a very short example, as I said, and JSON could be many lines long. This shows that the format is generally set up with two curly braces or curly brackets that look like this. I didn't put the uh, curly brackets because you guys know what is curly brackets. Most data used in JSON ends up being encapsulated in a JSON object. Key value pairs have a column between them, as in key value here. Uh, each key value pair is separated by a comma. So the middle of a JSON looks like this: key value. Uh, in our example above, the first key value pairs is first uh, underscore name Sammy. Here. JSON keys are on the left side of the column. They need to be wrapped in uh, double quotation marks as in key and can be any valid string. Within each object, keys need to be unique. These key string can include white spaces as in first name, but that can make it harder to access when you are programming. So it's best to use underscores as in we mentioned here in the first name when you write using underscore. JSON values are found here. JSON values are found to the right of the column at the general level. These need to be one of six simple data types: string, numbers, objects, arrays, booleans, null. At the broader level, values can also be made up of the complex data types of JSON object or array, which is covered in the next section that we are going to talk about. Each of the data types that are passed in as values into JSON will maintain their own syntax, so strings will be in quotes, but numbers will not be. Yes. Um, uh, though in JSON files, we will typically see the format expanded over multiple lines. JSON can also be written all in one line. This would be more common with another file type or when you encounter a JSON string. Writing the JSON format in multiple lines here. It's like that. Multiple lines. This may often makes it much more readable. It's easier, especially when dealing with a large data set because JSON ignores white space between its elements. You can space out your columns and key value pairs in order to make the data even more human readable. Um, it's important to keep in mind that though they look similar, a JSON object is not the same format as JavaScript object. So though you can use functions within JavaScript objects, you cannot use them as values in JSON. The most important attribute of JSON is that it can be readily transferred between programming languages in a format that all of the participating languages can work with. JavaScript objects can only be worked with directly through the JavaScript programming language. What else? So far, we have a look at the JSON format in its simplest terms, but JSON can be more complex. Yeah, here I talked about working with complex types in JSON. Uh, JSON can store nested objects in JSON format in addition to nested arrays. These objects and arrays will be passed as values assigned to keys and typically will be compressed of key value pairs as well. Uh, nested objects. We have this example here in the users.json file below for each of the four users, uh, like these names: Sammy, Jesse, Drew, Jamie. There's a nested JSON object passed as the value for each of the users with its own nested keys of username and location. They relate to each of the users. Uh, the first nested JSON object is highlighted here. The first one, first part here. In this example, here curly braces are used throughout to form a nested JSON object with the associated username and location data for each of four users, just like any other value. When using objects, commas are used to separate elements. Oh, I think this, sorry, extra, yeah. Nested arrays. Data can also be nested within the JSON format by using JavaScript arrays that are passed as a value. JavaScript uses square brackets on either end of its array type. Arrays are ordered collections and can contain values of different data types. Sorry. Um, we may use an array when we are dealing with a lot of data that can be easily grouped together, like when there are various websites and social media profile associated with a single user. Uh, mhm. When with this first nested array highlighted, a user profile for Sammy may look like this. Yes, here it may look like this, as I said. Um, the website key and social media here, and this one and this one. I each use an array to nest information belonging to Sammy's two websites, links, and three social media profile links. We know that those arrays because of the use of square brackets. Let us work with more complex and complicated examples here. Yes. And comparison to XML, XML or extensible markup language is a way to store accessible data that can be read by both humans and machines. The XML format is available for use across many programming languages. Um, in many ways, XML is very similar to JSON, but it requires much more text, so it's longer in length and more time consuming to read and write. XML must be parsed with an XML parser, but JSON can be parsed with a standard function. Also, unlike JSON, XML cannot use arrays. Uh, we, We have a data here used in XML and also in JSON. Let's see what is the difference. We can see a lot of difference here. It's totally different from each other. Uh, let's see, we see that JSON is much more compact and does not require end tags while XML does. Additionally, XML is not making use uh, of any array as this example of JSON does, which you can tell through the use of square brackets. If you are familiar with HTML, you will notice that XML looks quite similar in its use of tags, while JSON is linear and less verbose than XML, and quick to use in many situations, including Ajax applications. You will want to understand the type of project you are working on before deciding that what data structures to use. Oh, here's the conclusion. Um, the conclusion is JSON is lightweight format that enables you uh, to easily share, store, and work with data. Uh, as a format, JSON has been experiencing increased support in APIs, including the Twitter API, because you likely won't be creating your own JSON files, but procuring them from other sources. It's important to think less about JSON structure and more about how to best use JSON in your program. And that was all. I hope you like it, and thank you.